Hello, welcome to Murf+E Unfiltered Zero BS Biz Talk. I'm Kathleen Murphy, your host, and I'm here with my guest host today, Patric Barbieri. How are you, Patric?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Well, as we were discussing a topic to select in terms of what would work for both of us, there were so many to choose from.
Yes. Yeah.
But I was excited about the fact that this was one of the ones that you said, oh, this would be a lot of fun to talk about, especially based on our mutual past experience of working with many people, teams, both sports teams as well as professional teams, if you will. So I'm really excited to dig in and hear from your side what I'm going to hear. And so we'll kick off, and the overview for this particular topic is that we know that being able to communicate well takes time. There's an essence to it that you have to really put a lot of effort into. It doesn't come easily to most people, although there are those few people out there, those exceptions where they typically might be better than others, and you generally can spot them right away. And I also think that there are some generations that have advantages potentially over other generations in terms of being able to communicate well.
True.
And I'm not dinging any particular generation either, because the current generation of people, perhaps in their 20s or even teens right now, there may be some phenomenal communicators, but I think often they don't get the credit that they should. And I've talked about that a lot lately, it seems. But I'm really interested in finding people that I can come across at times that just have the gift of gab. And there's a expression, chatty Cathy, which drives me crazy when I hear that. I think, oh, it's not. I hope that's really not me to some degree, but I suppose in some ways that can be a compliment. But one of the things I was thinking about as I was putting this story together was an analogy in terms of what's analogous to being a strong communicator. And I thought about ice dancing. Now, you are an ice hockey player,
yes, yeah.
so you can appreciate the essence of skating and being a good skater. And the thing that I was drawing as an analogy to ice dancing versus communication was the fact that there's a whole lot of practice that goes into making somebody look incredibly elegant out there, and yet they make it also look so easy. However, there are some elements about what they're doing in ice dancing that are much more controlled than, say, being able to communicate in any situation. The variables in ice dancing are a lot less because typically you're practicing something and you either get it right or you don't. But as you know, with communication, it can go in so many different in so many different angles. It's hard to know which angle it's going to go in. Now, you also could see ice dancers being very awkward, right? And we know that in some communication situations, people can come across as being very awkward also, or not. And the or not is preferable, certainly, to most people. And we'll be talking about a number of other factors, of course. But one of the things that I also like to talk to people about when they're struggling potentially with their communication is that one of the things that they should probably start doing is visualizing themselves maybe being comfortable talking. So what's your take in terms of communicating with colleagues or teammates, perhaps harken back to your past experience with being on sports teams, and maybe the difference between some of those. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you. I mean, when you had the list of topics, right, and I threw them by you, and I saw communication as one of them. I just think it's the most important one. So I just figured I want to take the most challenging one and try that, right? So
thank you.
I took my notes because I had to go back and really think about, I was a leader of an organization.
That's right.
Certainly been part of teams. But I had to look about, well, how did I communicate? What did I do, and what did I do well? What did I not do so well?
Sure.
I wrote them down, so hopefully I'll get to them as we talk. But it started to tell a story about what I learned. And I think it started off by, anybody in the position of communicating has to be humble enough to know that it isn't always natural. It isn't always you're going to be successful.
That's right.
Even if you have, like you said, the gift of gab, it doesn't mean that you would be So I definitely wanted to take that on and talk about some of the things that I called them. I called them the principles or the tenets or whatever they are.
I like that.
But it was fun. So that exercise was helpful.
It's not something you always think about. I mean, we have to do this every single day, but when you start to think about the mechanics behind how do you do this successfully, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
And I think too, like, what I felt that I learned over the years, because I did struggle and I did make mistakes, and I wish I bit my tongue sometimes, or I wish I said something that my gut told me, but I didn't because I was afraid to.
That's right.
But what I learned about what I did, it took 20 years, 25 years, 30, whatever it was. I felt like I was always still learning. One of the things that I always remember was my first confidence booster about communication. I had been, I was a teacher, then I was a coordinator, which I would supervise people, and even on sports teams. I never saw, I think I was a little bit more introverted, so I never saw myself as like the spokesperson who would be out there rah-rah. It was more like the kind of the quiet person.
Right.
But one time, I remember a colleague, and a few of them had said it at that time, said, when you go to a meeting or you're talking with somebody one-on-one, you're so calm, you're so relaxed, and it's easy to talk. Now, I never realized that about myself, except for the fact that I think I was doing it on purpose in the sense that I had learned mindfulness for so many years.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And I always tried to control my emotions in a sense of not repressing them, but just kind of how I would react to things. I remember I was always taught, keep the body still and the mind will follow. But the interesting thing about that was I didn't take it as a compliment at first, but then I thought about it because what was really going on inside my body when I was in those difficult conversations, or difficult meetings, was a storm going on in my body.
Oh, sure.
And I felt the nerves, but I was able to kind of, sit back or just relax because I thought about that So I think I needed that confidence as a leader because I didn't know if I was a good communicator or not.
We don't always get told whether we are or not.
Right.
And oftentimes when you're not a strong communicator, people don't say anything.
Right.
And so you make this assumption that, I must be good at this because no one ever tells me otherwise.
Right.
Whereas there are situations also, though, when you hear that you are a strong communicator, people just aren't saying that for the sake of telling you that. So I think that can be sort of a clue for some people. If you're not hearing any kind of feedback, that should be perhaps something to take a look at. In terms of this might be an aha moment where maybe I should ask somebody, how do I communicate? What style do you think that I have? Am I a strong communicator? Any number of different scenarios like that.
It's like we can get an evaluation after the conversation and say, give it back to us. But we would want to know if they walked away with, do they feel better? Do they feel worse?
Or,
was it helpful?
Right, or I didn't understand anything that you said because maybe it wasn't helpful. That I just felt as if you were talking and I didn't understand whether, to your point, that was something I was supposed to take action on. Was I being reprimanded? It could go any number of different ways. And
let me just throw one more thing about that because this is kind of, it was maybe at the same time where I thought about this. Somebody said, or I heard, a good communicator is hearing the things that aren't being said.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
I guess at first I didn't really know what that meant. Maybe I did conceptually.
Pretty ethereal.
Right. But I never really experienced something.
No, right.
And I got tons of examples of it, but this one was a really good one. I remember I was talking to this person. She came in to me, and she was, I thought, coming in for a complaint.
Oh.
And that's kind of how it was, not about me, but about something that was going on. So the person sat down, and we were talking, and it was intense because I was like, I wanted to fix the problem. I was trying different ways to what I could say. But in my mind, I was saying, I made a value judgment on it, like right or wrong, I did. But this doesn't seem to be a big issue. I wonder why this is coming here, right?
Right.
So later on in the conversation, I knew the person, but I didn't know the person that well.
Sure.
I mean, we have 250 employees where we were, so you meet a lot of people. It's not that many, but it's still a lot.
It's a lot.
So I felt a gut that something quite wasn't right. Didn't know what it was. So I said, hey, how you doing? Everything okay? And when I said that, like, the person just, tears and sobbing, and everything just came out. And our conversation, even though the complaint or what she was talking about still was kind of there, it wasn't really what the person was looking for.
Right, right.
And it kind of taught me something about listening to the conversation. And like, I could have just communicated in the sense, just addressed the issue and that's it, and the person walked out.
Right, right.
But that's like an example I thought of, like.
That's a great example. Just the how do you sort of listen to what isn't being said?
Right.
Because you were trusting your gut at that point, because what they were saying wasn't really what they wanted to potentially tell you, but they didn't really know how to go about telling you it any other way other than coming up with some other reason to talk to you, and then hoping eventually as a professional that you would figure out that maybe they were there for another reason, and they were fortunate that you picked up on that. So one of the things that I think about in terms of this particular topic is in terms of communicating with our colleagues. As you said, you led a large organization, so everyone has a different communication style. So is it upon us as something that we have to learn in terms of understanding each person's unique communication style in order to effectively communicate with them? People may not like this answer, but the answer is yes. And yet there are sort of nuances to communication styles, and so you can sort of have maybe some, if you will, styles that there are modifications off of them. But you do need to learn a lot about the different types of communication styles. We're not going to get into necessarily talking about that today, per se. But I remember, for me personally, when I realized that communicating was important, happened to be probably when I was pretty young, and we'd have a family party. And if I wanted to be engaged in the family party, it meant that I would have to talk to family members that came over to the house. So that was my earliest memory in terms of like learning this is probably something that I needed to do. Fast track to high school. I was at a new school, mixing in with lots of other students that I didn't know. One way to meet them was you have to be good at communicating with them. Fast track to college, same thing. I didn't know anybody at that school, same appreciation. Fast track to first job and applying for the first job and figuring out like, okay, what kind of communication style is this person looking for me to have in order to try to secure this job? I ended up getting the job. My first job was with Staples, the Office Superstore at their corporate headquarters. But what I soon realized when I finally got into the job was that I had a lot still more to learn in terms of communication, especially based on who I was going to be communicating with. Have you been able to leverage or teach others communication styles or about communication? We both have children, so I would imagine that you've probably passed along some gems to your daughter.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, how do I leverage? Like, first of all, back to that confidence, like I never really felt like I had something to teach.
Right.
It was always, I think in work was my practice ground, right? Because that's where I was able to, you know, succeed and fail.
Right.
I had a martial arts school, but the communication there was significantly different than it was in a work environment, only because of who you are and what you represent, right? So as far as being able to, you know, utilize communication, it's certainly hard with your own family, you know, certainly with, you know, especially a teenage daughter. But I think like when using communication and trying to I had to think about my job is to have to model it and teach it. And one of the things I think that I've been able to at least help with or I thought of quite a bit, I play guitar. You know that, we've talked about this. And when I was taught how to play guitar, I used to, you know, I had the chords and I had the notes, and I just play as much as possible if somebody was playing a chord progression over it. I never forget, somebody said to me, you have to allow space. I was like, what does that mean? If I stop playing, that means somebody's going to say, I stopped playing, like something's wrong.
Exactly.
But that's actually making music when you make a phrase, you stop, you breathe, then you play the next phrase. Like, I think communication and what I tried to teach, whether it be my supervisors or the teachers at my martial arts school, was that you don't have to be talking all the time. You don't have to be teaching all the time.
Right.
You have to step back.
Yes.
And just allow the conversation, whether it to be a little bit of silence, and that's really where the hearing comes in and the listening comes in.
Exactly.
And I did that a lot with supervisors at work because I felt sometimes their conversations were so fast and so quick that probably the person that they were meeting with didn't really get out what they wanted to get out.
Right,
Whose
exactly.
agenda was it?
That's just it, exactly.
So,
exactly. Well,
I don't know if it's passing it on or not or leveraging it, but it was more modeling what I felt other people could benefit from conversations.
I love that. And that's probably a good segue just to share some of the tips that I have in terms of how I've gone about an approach learning about communication, passing along to others, improving my own communication with the teams that I work with, because I work with corporate and sports teams, so they're two different worlds. And generationally very different as well for the most part, because my sports teams are from 18 to maybe 24 years old, and the corporate teams are usually around 22 plus. So very, very different. But an interesting statistic that I thought was fascinating to me, this was an HR review, it said that 48% of millennials reported having a hard time communicating with their colleagues. So I think that these tips, I'm hoping that some of the people in the audience might be able to appreciate leveraging some of these. So the first one is in terms of if you don't have any standard questions that you could ask somebody in terms of going into a blind conversation with somebody. I always tell people to open up a conversation with, especially if you just hear someone, you're trying to engage with them and they're just saying, how are you? And they just say, fine. And yet you want to continue on with that conversation. There are things that you can do. One of the things that you might do is you might say, and your earlier reference was perfect, because you might say to somebody, you're having a tough day, and then yes, it just is, it opens things up for them. But I would say also, if you're tripped up by not knowing what to say with your sort of standard questions that you can ask people, you can also ask them about maybe you notice something about them, such as like, gosh, you have such great energy. How do you maintain this, this level of energy that you have? And you can kind of move on from that, and you can just go miles with that one. You may not even be able to get in a word edgewise from that point on, potentially. But I think that that's a great thing if you can get sort of launch somebody into being comfortable enough to share the information with you. And then if you don't know, or you don't have a sense of your colleague that well in terms of being able to appreciate maybe how you can help them or not, one of the things that you can do is you can just ask them potentially if they'd like you to be a sounding board, maybe perhaps, as you were saying earlier, just to listen. Give them that opportunity, because so many times when people are nervous, they talk, and they talk fast. And so see what you can do to either slow them down or, you know, interject questions if you can, to try to get them to calm down a little bit. And another suggestion that I have is, especially for a teammate, is, and this can apply actually to both a work teammate or a sports kind of teammate, if you will. Talk to them about maybe some travel plans that they have, either coming up or maybe a trip that they've gone on. Ask them, do they like to travel? It's go for those neutral topics that that are just going to be able to carry you sort of far without stepping on any landmines. And there are plenty of those. And then finally, I would say that just try to have an open mind in terms of having your conversations with people, because I think when we go into having preconceived notions about talking to somebody, I think we're generally often and many times often wrong in terms of our preconceived notions about
right.
what we might hear. So it's
true.
easy certainly to say,
Yeah.
have an open mind,
Yeah.
but if you can practice that, like you said, practicing mindset,
Yeah.
it's probably going to serve you extremely well. What about any other tips that you might have?
That's interesting that you said that. I'm reading a book. I don't know if this is a relative of yours or not, but it's written by Kate Murphy.
Oh, no.
It's called.
She might be, but not.
It's called "You're Not Listening."
Oh, okay.
So I got it on Libby through the Boston Public Library, and it talked about that, what you were saying.
Oh.
I'm probably like 3/4 through the book, but exactly what you were talking about, that, you're listening, right?
Yes.
Or you're not.
Or you're not. You're distracted.
Exactly. And this book kind of it's nothing that you haven't heard before, but it kind of brings it to light in a different way.
Sure.
So just a little bit. So it was funny, I was reading, I said, I got to
Oh, that's perfect.
Kate Murphy.
Oh, I love that.
So what you were saying, I just want to back up 1 second about when you talk to the individual or the team. I always thought about communication in 3 ways. One was the organization, the bigger, then teams,
Yes.
then the individual.
Yes.
So
Right.
how do you tailor each one? So we're looking at more teams than individuals. But
And they're entirely different.
Oh, absolutely. So one thing I was thinking about when you were giving that example was teams, and when you're talking to them and how to, so I would run team meetings, and I would run the meeting, and I would facilitate. And I would think that I'm asking for input or people to say things, but in fact, most times it was quiet.
Sure.
And people are either nervous or afraid, they don't want
Right.
to be judged, all those things.
They're looking down, saying, signaling, please do not call upon me.
Exactly. Or I'm not going to say that because it's disagreeing with somebody, right?
Right.
So one technique that I learned in that realm, it comes from, it's almost like a dual hybrid between individual and teams, because they have to be together.
Yes.
So I would start doing meeting preps. So I would send out my agenda. Then I would pick, maybe 2 or 3 people from the team, and I would call them in to talk to them. I said, hey, what do you think about the agenda?
I really like that.
And they would say, oh, it's great. I said, anything that I should put on the agenda, yeah, maybe I want to, put this on it,
Sure.
Of course, I'm thinking, well, you should have said that when I sent it out, but it's okay.
Right.
I
Right.
know that this is the opportunity for me to to coach them through this. So I said, what are your thoughts about, say, item number 2? I don't like it. I don't think that we should do it, whatever it is. I said, okay, great. I said, will you talk about that at the meeting? I don't want to just call on you, but
Right.
for that one, will
Bring
you
that
be able
up.
to speak
Right.
up? As I started doing that more and more people started speaking up,
Good.
disagreeing.
That's healthy.
Absolutely. And what's that quote? You want people to be able to say whatever can be said at the meeting, not after the meeting. There's
That's
some
right.
percentage for that.
Sure.
And I think just by giving them the sense that, Kathy, I really care about what you think about this particular one.
Right.
That their confidence definitely was boosted. They feel good, like you gave that positive recognition. They are getting positive recognition and they're going to bring it up.
That's right.
And there's been some times, for the most times, the person brought it up, but there were a couple of times that the person didn't. So I go back.
Right, you go back.
And talk about what happened. Oh, I was about to, but then I thought we were going to go on to the next subject. It's okay. Well, next time, be around. So, in that respect, I think communicating, you can't just expect people to do it on their own volition. You can't expect that they're going to feel comfortable to it, even though that they have the expertise or they have the know-how.
That's right. And I think it's well understood that public speaking is the number one fear that people have, and it's public speaking takes shape in many forms. It could be in a meeting such as you're describing.
Right.
So the fact that people are not participating lends itself to this is why people are
Right.
not, because they're usually not comfortable doing that.
Right.
If you ask somebody to get ready to give a public speech tomorrow and they didn't do it on a frequent basis,
Yeah, no.
you probably would give them close to something equivalent
yeah.
of a heart attack, or
Right.
cause some other medical transgression to occur, which
Right,
wouldn't
right.
be favorable to anybody.
Sure.
People don't like it. Very few people will say, "Oh my gosh, thank you for that opportunity. This is so fantastic. I can't wait to be there."
Yes.
Yes,
So true.
please, more. Well, I can't believe that the time has just absolutely flown by. This topic, we could go
Great
on
topic, yeah.
for forever.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, we don't have forever today, at least, but we'll have to maybe have you come back if you'd be willing to come back, Patric,
love
as
the
a
subject.
guest.
It's great. It's so important nowadays that people really pay attention to this. So thank you for bringing it up.
Well, thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it. And thank you for being here with us today. And please come back and see more of what we have to say on Murf and the Unfiltered Zero BS Biz Talk. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you the next time.